I mean, the thing is when you switch your jobs and you talk a good game, you go up each time.
Right.
The third one, it was like, I forgot what the money was, but it was like way more money than I want. I was like, oh, so you get all this money and you get this title and you're like, oh. And then you get there, you're like, I have no fucking clue of what I am doing. None. Literally none.
So when did you decide to leave?
So, well, I mean, when Deloitte let me go, which I'm like, you should have. That's when it was, and also you do the like, okay, if I hated each job and I hate this job and I'm making so much money and I'm still miserable, you're
right.
like, let's take a minute out, as you say, regroup. How is this going to work for the next like 50 years of life? Like, how is this going to work? Like, because now you're making a certain amount of money and you're still miserable. So that's when I was like, okay, I gotta just take a moment here and I gotta stop. This is like, I hate it. It's not going to work.
And is that when you started your first podcast?
No.
They
Then
didn't have podcasts yet.
No. So I always thought I wanted to do something with HR. So that's how I became a recruiter. Because the thing is, when you're a lawyer and you want to be a recruiter, all the legal headhunting firms are like,
right.
you can just don't even go for the interview. You're hired. Like,
right.
You're a lawyer and you want to place lawyers. So I went to staffing firms that were placing lawyers and everyone else there was a lawyer. And as soon as I got there, I was like, oh my God, this is like, wow, I love this.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one firm, I'll spare you a long story. There was one firm that was like starting a creative division, and the woman there was like, she was probably like, who's that cool, funky gay kid? She was like, why don't you come work in I'm like, I don't know advertising or media. She's like, you'll learn it. So then I went to work in her. I was like, oh, I can get away from the law even better. So I went to work in her division, and she was hired to start this division, but she was like on her third, like she was out the door. Like she basically was like retired. She was never there. So I was just like, I have no boss and all the clients are calling. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'll just handle all this. And I just literally learned this whole new industry. And then eventually I was like, well, I'm going to take these. So then you do your work at a firm, you get a salary, right. You get a percentage. And I'm like, I appreciate the medical insurance and the salary, but I'm just running the numbers on the commission that
mm-hmm.
if I was sitting home in my pajamas, I would keep this whole commission and I'd be making a lot more money. But I was like, I just want to so then I started my own recruiting company. That's how I started it.
And how long did that company last?
For years, 10 years.
Oh, wow.
This is when I start dating myself, but for 10 years.
And when
this is why when I say I ran a successful company, I really, truly, for 10 years.
Did you have any employees?
Well, yes and no, but then like I had like a lot of temps. So it was like perm and temp. So like when you
mm-hmm.
have temp, you have like a book of business
right.
of like, yeah, I had a lot. I mean, it was, so I did like splits with other recruiters. Like you do the same thing I do, we'll split it or you can, whatever. But no, it was just me. And I worked that's when when I started my company, my goal was just to make the same amount of money that I
mm-hmm.
made in this, but quickly within this, I was like, oh, I think I can make a lot more. And
right.
that's when I was like, I never took it for granted. I mean, I worked for everything I got, but I said, if every hour I work, I'm just going to make more money. And I'm like, this is not going to last forever. So I am just going to work like for 10, it wasn't the whole 10 years because in the end it started to change, but I worked all the time. I don't even know what's like at 5 o'clock, I'd be like, okay, the second shift is starting. And I would work like every day from like 5 a.m. to like 10 p.m.
So you have this successful recruiting firm for 10 years. And then you decide, I don't want this anymore.
Well, yeah, it's like, look, it's like somewhere in there, it was like a lot of companies like, we're not going to use recruiting firms anymore. So the
right.
market started changing also.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, I think success in business is like hard work and determination. I still think like part of it is luck. Like, sure, you're on the New York Housewives. This is how it happened. Skinny Girl is a brilliant idea. It's a little bit of luck. I mean,
right.
also a national platform, but there's a little bit of luck that it
right.
all worked out that way. It's not taking anything away from Bethany. So every time I say this, people are like, no, you worked really hard and were great at what you did. I was like, it's just a little bit of luck in the timing of like, I would have really hard searches, but then I had clients that would be like, hey, we need like 6 college kids. And I'd be like, what? Like, you're paying me 20%, like $6,000 for it. It literally could have been anyone. No, yes, I have to screen, but, you just make sure that it could be. So I had a lot of easy, like, oh, this is easy money. So I just was like, then you hear, we're not using you anymore. Like, we can't. So it just, you heard that, and then it was years, but it slowly started.
The industry was changing.
Yes. And then I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I haven't liked this also for like 3 years.
Right.
B, I'm tired of working. And C, the industry has really changed. I'm like, it's time. Let's move on, people.
Your next move was?
Then I didn't really want to do anything for a minute. And then eventually I was like, maybe I should do contract recruiting. Like, I'll go into a company. You have a lot of jobs to fill. I'll be here for 2 months, 3 months. No response.
So when did you start your obsession with the reality shows and feel the need to become one of the voices in reality TV?
Well, I always was into like pop culture growing up, like 90210, Melrose Place. And I liked early reality TV like The Hills and Laguna Beach and all of that stuff.
Guess which was the first reality show I was ever on? Here's a surprise for you.
I'm trying to think of like a fun answer.
It was the Gastineau Girls.
Oh, I knew that. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know that, but that makes sense.
I was friends with Lisa, and it was one of the very first reality shows.
Was that on E?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Were you on it like for a big part?
No. Oh. I was on it like twice. I was friends with Lisa, and so I popped on it a couple of times.
That's so funny. Yeah. So did that prepare you for Housewives?
Nothing can prepare one for Housewives.
You need to come back so I can interview you more. So
your first podcast.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
My first episode?
No, when you had a partner.
Oh yeah.
Right? And you were together
for a hot minute.
How long? No, it was more than a minute.
It was more. Listen, because I do podcast consulting on the side. My rates are very high now because I don't have any time. But truly, when someone wants to start a podcast and has no idea what they're doing, I can get them to start it. If I really had time, I could take, I'm telling you right now, I could take any podcast out there that is not making money. And if you just came to my consulting business, I could turn your whole podcast. I just don't have the time.
Right.
Like truly, and this is I could start a podcast network and have like 15 podcasts under me and make all of you guys money, and I would make a ton of money on all of you. I just don't have the time to do it. I mean, it would also be a lot of hassle dealing with all these people.
Talk to me about your first podcast and your partner.
Well, I highly recommend, and I say this all the time, number one rule when I do my consulting is either I think just don't start your podcast with someone. I think I told you that when you were going to start a podcast for a minute. Or start it with a family member. I mean, there was a brief foray into a podcast. And look, I'm like, personally, we've all seen, I got a lot to learn. You're taking over my dating. I am a professional success. I have never gone into an area of things I don't know.
Talk to me about the breakup